Hello, Sean here. Today I want to talk to you about trust and expectations in coaching, and specifically clients' expectations of what coaching is about and what it can accomplish and what it looks and sounds and feels like. Because I've noticed over the last year or two in different coaching interactions that people come to me already convinced that they believe in the value of coaching. You would think that is the kind of client you want to work with because you don't have to sell them on the process. They're already convinced of it. And based on what I'm going to talk about a bit later, which is called common factors research, we know that this actually matters. This is actually one of three main factors that contributes to positive outcomes. It's about 15% of the overall outcome of therapy, or in this case, coaching. So it is a good thing if someone shows up not skeptical of the process, right? But one challenge I see is that some clients come with a very particular idea of what coaching should be. And in my experience, the people who are ready to commit to coaching are already very highly functioning individuals. And typically, these are not people who struggle with self-regulation, discipline, setting goals. Some of this we might put in the box of what we call performance coaching. And yet, strangely, these people are perhaps the people who show up with the most ferocious desire to continue developing, and yet the model that they've used to develop up until this point is primarily around performance, around meeting goals, and often maybe fitting into social roles. And so my sense often is that for coaching to be impactful for these people, following those more I would say maybe basic protocols of habit formation, accountability, they can be helpful sometimes, but usually the client needs more. And yet this process does not look like the kind of personal development approach that they're used to. And let me just explain. I was trained in a method that's going to be talking about a book. It's focusing. It was created by Eugene Gendlin, who was trained as a philosopher and then started working with Carl Rogers, the humanistic psychologist. And his idea in developing focusing was that they noticed in research that people who connect on a visceral, physical, felt level, what he called the felt sense, people who tap into that directly, rather than they noticed that people who talked about their experiences in the past tense, in a very distant, remote way, well, those people did not make as much progress as those people who connected with their experiences and spoke in the present tense, and also connected their experience to their bodies. And this is what we call somatic approach. And it's relatively simple, and yet it's not that widespread in coaching. And what it is basically sitting and letting your body settle and noticing relatively small sensations in your body, and slowly putting what he called handles on these emotions. And it's a kind of a slow process that is almost like Jung's active imagination, if you're familiar with Jung. It's playful, and it can be quite beautiful. It's almost like a daydream, a reverie. This does not fit with what most people expect of coaching. And there are people for whom, I'm not saying that this is for everyone. But I do feel that for those people who really would benefit from coaching primarily from a developmental perspective, which is to say, not just about meeting goals and achieving things, but kind of doing deeper work around identity, around meaning, around purpose, then this type of coaching I find is often exactly what is called for. And I'm making this video because I'm thinking, how do you convey that to a potential client? I think this comes down to something I've talked about in other videos about this theory of the hemispheres, and how this is in Iain McGilchrist's beautiful, challenging, difficult, insightful book, The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World. This is kind of like my Bible, I would say. It's this idea that the master in the title refers to the right hemisphere, and then we've got the left hemisphere, which is the emissary, and that is the part of the brain that's conceptual. It's also associated with grasping with our hands. And interestingly, the left hemisphere, the area of the left hemisphere associated with conceptual language, is the same area of the brain that also controls those of us who are right-handed when we move out and physically try to grasp things in the physical world. And so when you think about it, a left hemisphere perspective is one where basically we're very conceptual in our experience of life. And going back to the idea of those people who show up already sold on coaching have been sold a very conceptual process. And it has its place, especially if it's to do with habit formation and sort of for more functional things, it's very useful. But like I said, for these other developmental approaches to purpose, identity, then we need to move back over to the seat of wisdom, which is the right hemisphere. And there's this great quotation, which is sometimes attributed to Einstein, but in fact, sadly, is, like many of these quotations, not actually something he said. But I'm going to say it because it's a great quotation, and I think it's fair to say that the sentiment he would have agreed with, even if these words actually were not his. So here's the quotation: "The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift." Now, this also fits nicely with the title of Iain McGilchrist's book, The Master and His Emissary, this idea that intuition, although the quotation doesn't mention it, the idea is the intuition is this right hemisphere function. And so coaching, which is embodied, which draws on physical sensations, also Jungian approaches also draw on this less conceptual, we might call it irrational, but it's not irrational, it's beyond rational. It's we now know, I mean, in the Master and His Emissary, we learn actually that that conceptual reason actually depends on emotion. So they're not a binary. They're they support each other. So let me see if I can get myself back on track. This type of coaching that I do, or at least sometimes do, it's not all of the coaching, but focusing I use occasionally, Jungian concepts I draw in occasionally. What they have in common is that they are encouraging clients to go into that foggy place of unknowing. And what's interesting is in coaching, we actively promote this idea. You're going to come to coaching and you're going to find clarity. And I find it really interesting that we talk so much about clarity. We take it for granted that clarity is the most important thing. And yet that to me is a very left hemisphere way of approaching coaching. The right hemisphere, Iain McGilchrist talks about it. If the right hemisphere is about the implicit, the left hemisphere is explicit. So wisdom necessarily cannot be easily articulated. And again, coaching, we like protocols, we like methods, we like, we like concepts. And this is actually antithetical to deep work, the deep work. Doesn't mean that those concepts aren't useful. I mean, these concepts are what allow us to describe this distinction between the hemispheres. So it's not that concepts don't matter, it's that they can take us only so far. And so this video, I'm trying to convey, whether I'm doing a good job or not is another question, but what I'm trying to convey is, if you're a potential client, or if you're just curious about, if you're interested in coaching generally, and you're wondering what coaching can be, the right hemisphere involves the implicit, the body, paradox, accepting that something and its opposite can be true at the same time, all sorts of things that are almost heretical to the left hemisphere. That sounds like nonsense to the left hemisphere. The right hemisphere is able to appreciate the whole of a situation, not just to see it as little parts. The left hemisphere just thinks the entire world is little pieces like cogs in a clock that fit together in a mechanistic way, whereas the right hemisphere sees everything as a whole, a gestalt, a form, an overall form. Now, I'll have to save, I'll go into this in more detail in another video, but what I wanted to get at in this video is the fact that if you are looking for these deeper goals, then it's at least worth considering approaches which on the surface may sound less serious. And yet there is evidence to support these approaches. And maybe I'll just finish with one insight from this book. This is The Essential Guide to ACT, A Liberated Mind by Stephen Hayes, who is the creator of ACT, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. And this is much more, you could say, not protocol-based, but it's mindfulness. It's far more mainstream. And one insight from this book that really blew my mind, I mentioned it in another video a couple of months ago, is this thing called the sensitivity effect. And the sensitivity effect, it has got to do with rules, and how when we learn rules, we over-apply them, and how they did in the experiments with to do with like getting pellets out of getting food, and they put humans and I don't know if it was birds, different types of animals in similar situations. And what they found is that initially the food would be released every 10 seconds, let's say, and the animals would be much quicker to realize when the circumstances had changed, when the food was being released at a different rate. The birds would adjust much more quickly. Human beings would be, the human subjects, test subjects, would be much more stubborn and less perceptive of the change in their environment. And this is, Stephen Hayes doesn't talk about the hemispheres. That's not his bag, but he talks about the symbolic mind, and that's definitely, the symbolic mind is a synonym for the conceptual mind, which is primarily the left hemisphere. So this idea that people who come to coaching maybe are coming to it often, not always, with the symbolic mind, the left hemisphere, expecting there to be rules, to be structure, clarity. And this idea that that actually, when we believe that there's a rule for everything, and we don't accept that there is this thing, this process, this intuition, this instinct in us, if we think we can simply follow frameworks for these other, more deeper, challenging goals, well, we're not using the right tools for the project. And so I hope this video has been instructive. I will be making more about these topics. I'll be definitely doing a couple of videos about Iain McGilchrist. But to finish, if you think that maybe you're coming to personal development from a very left hemisphere perspective, a couple of things that you can easily do without going to a coach. Trying to notice physical sensations in your body and sitting with them. From a Jungian perspective, paying attention to images, symbols. It could be in your dreams, but it could also be memories. You may suddenly remember something from your past. That memory carries symbolism in it. Poetry, music. Unfortunately, and I fall into this trap myself often, those of us who are either interested in personal development or work in the field, or both, and as it is in my case, you can end up consuming a lot of content that is conceptual, and that has its place. But the right hemisphere thrives on art, music, movement. And if you want real breakthroughs, real insights, we have to make peace with not just looking for clarity, but being willing to go into that fuzzy, foggy, unclear space and become more comfortable living more often from our right hemisphere. Thanks for watching.